Well, unfortunately, it was another afternoon of what could have, should have, and probably should have been, I said, for the year 2022 Las Vegas Raiders as they fall 25-20 to the Indianapolis Colts. Eddie Paskal here hanging out in the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center with our guy Jason Fitz. And Fitz, let's start here. Raiders lose 25-20. But before we get into the game and before we talk about some of the play calls towards the end, what was good, what was not so good, Matt Ryan apparently, throwing the calendar back to 2012. Let's begin here. From your professional point of view, Mr. Fitz, as we sit here on November 13th in the evening and the Raiders are 2-7, a meta question for you, my friend. How did we get here?
I think some years everything breaks right. That happened last year. You can make the argument, you and I have talked about this a bunch. You can make the argument with 6 walk-off wins last year, tying an NFL record, that it was really a 4-win team last year, not a 10-win team. But certain things broke right, and that's what you need some years. Some years everything breaks wrong. And I think that's a drastic oversimplification. But what you have right now are a lot of people, instead of having one of those years where everybody's having a career year and everything comes easy, it feels like everything's the exact opposite right now. There are 2 players that I think every single week are a delight to watch every time they have the chance to make a play. One is Devontae, obviously, who, again, just made play after play. I couldn't believe he made today. Yeah. And the other is the little engine that could in Maxx Crosby. We talk a lot about those 2 players. Everybody else at different times have had that play where you're like, my bad. If you've ever played gym basketball and you've got the my bad guy that continually heaves up the shot he shouldn't, but you're constantly, that's the guy that's always tapping his chest saying, my bad. Like, no kidding. This was another one of those games in a season full of different players at different positions having the my bad moment. And it just feels like this team can't overcome those missteps, especially when they come from different people at different times the whole time.
And I think you're 100% right, Fitz, where there is kind of that feeling of the Raiders coming back to the mean a little bit, right? I mean, last year was such an emotional roller coaster, good, bad, and oftentimes really ugly emotionally. But those Raiders, and you and I were texting about this during the game, where they found a way to win. Now, did they win a couple games that they probably shouldn't have and they had no business winning? 100%. Absolutely. I'm sure the guys in the locker room would be the first ones to tell you that. And so it does feel like they are kind of regressing to the mean in terms of just the averages, the laws of the universe, kind of saying, hey, last year was crazy. We got to even the scales a little bit. But to your point, man, I mean, we look at this team now, and I think it's fair to say the Raiders at this point, at this juncture, the biggest surprise in the NFL. This was a team that, I know they were held together by glue sticks and duct tape and what's the little pipe cleaner things that kids played with last year. But they were a playoff team, right? Yep. And this year you have all the fancy toys. You got Devontae, you got Chandler Jones, you have Josh McDaniels coming in to kind of reset and unleash Derek Carr. And it just hasn't stuck quite yet. And I think that for me, and you and I have talked about this a bunch, the biggest point of confusion for me is that every week, I mean, outside of the big thematic of the Raiders aren't getting the bounces and things aren't working maybe the way they should, it's not just one thing. And I think to me that's the most confusing aspect of this, Fitz, is that you can't really point your finger and say, if the Raiders fix this singular issue, that it's smooth sailing and, hey, they are back to where they were a year ago. To me, it's a much more nuanced and confusing question than that.
I sometimes, me, like the inner fat kid in me always goes back to food, right? And you can be the best chef in the world, but that doesn't mean you can make every food perfectly. And sometimes there's an adjustment. I'm really proud of the music career that I had, but there's a particular type of fiddle player that I was. I was a rock, country, pop fiddle player. Like those were influences to me, classic rock and all of those things. And I say that because if you had put me in a bluegrass band and said, hey, go be a bluegrass fiddle player, I don't do that well. And in fact, I turned down gigs when I was as broke as I could ever be because I knew it was not a good connection for me to be that type of musician. And I didn't want people to think less of me as a player. So I tried to steer towards what I'm good at. I feel like right now what I'm watching is a bunch of musicians that are being asked to play a type of music they're not comfortable with. And that's that adjustment. Like we just presume that the adjustment of a new staff with new players comes overnight. And suddenly I use Chicago as an example. It's taken until the last few weeks that the Bears have figured out, hey, here's what we can do with Justin Fields to make him the most effective version of himself that he can be. It just it feels like there's this moment where the players are trying to get to know the coaching staff's trying to get to know the players, and you have a bunch of guys that are being asked to play a type of music that maybe isn't what they feel comfortable with yet. And when you're uncomfortable, you make mistakes. And that's just for all, I don't care if it's what we do, Eddie. Like, if all of a sudden you're hosting a show that's about, foreign policy, you might make a mistake because you're sitting there saying, this isn't my area of expertise or what I do well.
Yeah, and I think just to piggyback off that, Fitz, Fitz, the one thing I kind of took away from that is you say, like, what you're good at, right? Fitz knows what he's good at. I know what I'm good at. Everyone in our collective, I think, does a really good job of identifying the skills that they have and how to put themselves in the best position to succeed. And using me as like a foreign policy guy is the perfect example. I would not thrive there. So now we look at the Raiders. We go back to the football field, and 9 games in, I ask you this, Fitz, what are the Raiders good at? Offensively, defense? I think the one answer, the punting and the kicking game, A.J. Cole what's going to get lost in all this? The man was out of his mind, arguably the best football player on the field for, maybe either team today. But what are the Raiders good at? Because we've seen when they've had success that it's Josh Jacobs pounding the ball, doing his thing, controlling the line of scrimmage. Today, we see Davante go absolutely wild, almost willing the Raiders down the field in the second half. He finishes his afternoon 9 catches for 126 yards and a touchdown. But I ask you this, like, what is the identity of the 2022 Raiders, offensively or defensively? Like, it's wild to me that we're now officially past the halfway point of the year, and you and I are still seemingly having the same conversation that we had in September, October, and early November.
If this was a restaurant, Eddie, it would close. And it would close because, frankly, to answer your question, there are 2 different answers. What are individual Raiders good at? What is Derek Carr good at? Derek Carr is good at doing a ton of homework, and Derek Carr is good at coming up to the line of scrimmage and knowing where pre-snap deciding what the best look's going to be. He's good at doing those sorts of things. What's Derek Carr not good at in his NFL career? Well, he's not good at going off platform, right? Like, he's not good at trying to find a way to step up in the pocket, get out of the way of the rush, and make a play, which, by the way, we saw some of today. What's Davante Adams good at? He's good
everything.
At getting open.
Yeah.
Davante's good at everything, but you got to get him the ball. What's Maxx Crosby good at? Maxx Crosby's good at getting after the passer. And this year he's been asked to do a lot of other things. There are individual things that individual Raiders are good at. What is this Raiders team good at? The answer right now is nothing. And look, I have to be honest in this moment. Like, I was 2-screening it because I was writing for ESPN.com as the afternoon was going on. And at one point I had the end of the Bills-Vikings game going on while the Raiders-Colts was going on 2 screens. So I got 2 screens side by side. And I was watching one side saying, wow, these 2 teams, even when they're not playing their best football and even when Josh Allen doesn't look great, these 2 teams are good football teams. And then I looked over at my beloved Raiders taking on the Colts and saying these 2 teams are not good football teams. And that's just, we see it in the result. At some point, the result is true to who they are as a team right now.
And you brought up Maxx, and you talk about all the incredible things he does on the field and the things that Maxx Crosby is good at. And I think that one thing that we don't talk about enough in terms of what Maxx is really good at, Maxx is incredibly good. Maxx is about, and you and Maxx are boys too. It's like, how personable Maxx is. And I think one thing that we don't discuss enough is how good at Maxx Crosby is at reading a room, dissecting a situation. He just hit Twitter, Fitz. He goes, y'all don't deserve this, Raider Nation. I love y'all. Like, Maxx is so good at setting the tone, at saying the perfect thing at the perfect moment. And I know that it's not what the fans want to hear right now. The Raiders just lost 25-20. A wildly disappointing season has now had, unfortunately, another kind of not positive mark on it. But Maxx is so good at understanding and feeling the rhythm of the fans. And I think one thing Josh McDaniels talked about in his postgame presser today, he said the same thing. He said, look, we have an incredibly passionate fan base. I understand their frustration. I feel their frustration, and they deserve better right now than this 2-7 football team.
The funny thing is when you watch the guys on the field and you watch the energy that Maxx plays with, it's contagious. We've talked about that.
Yep.
When you watch today, there was a play in the first half where Davante Adams made a heck of a move, managed to get a first down, and there was a penalty on the play. The play was called back, and you watch Davante lose it. And that fire.
I know exactly the play you're talking about. Yep.
That, and it was funny. They even commented on the broadcast for anyone that was watching on the TV side. The sideline reporter commented on the fact that there was just no communication, no fire on the side of the Raiders sideline. They just seemed shell-shocked again. We've seen that week in and week out. One of the things that has to be figured out is not just how to live within these systems from the coaching standpoints, but also how does that tone and that passion translate from Devontae to everybody else? Because right now it doesn't feel like it does, and in a week where certainly the loss of multiple players on the defensive side of the ball and 2 guys on the offensive side going to injured reserve, there are plenty of excuses to be made, but there's never an excuse for a team coming out flat. And there's never an excuse for this team just looking incapable of coming out and saying, this is what we want to do and this is how we do it. Like, I don't think the Raiders have an identity, and bad teams don't. And that's just, man, it hurts to say, because there is enough talent on this team. Even shorthanded, there was enough talent to win this football game.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%, Fitz. I mean, it is baffling, as we've said, and we've kind of gone around and around and around saying the same thing now for not only today, but last week, the past 2 weeks, the past month. It's just this team, and I'm the biggest believer of, you are what you earn in this league, right? It doesn't matter if you have 37 all-pros out there. You are what you are. But the Raiders are too good, too talented, Fitz, to be 2-7. But alas, here we are on November 13th, and that's exactly where they are. And it's baffling. It's confusing, and I don't really know if we're going to get a firm answer into how this happened until we have a chance to kind of go through the rest of the season, sit back and dissect what kind of happened.
And it's not easily fixable. Like, that's the other part of it. Yep. That's I have to say this loudly, because I know every time I talk to Raider Nation, and when I'm on the radio with Raider Nation Radio, a lot of people ask about the quarterback situation. That's a constant conversation. We went back at ESPN, and I sat down with a bunch of people smarter than me, and we looked at a 15-year period in the first round of the draft, looking just at first-round draft picks. And if you look back at a 15-year period, I'm going to take 1 year's draft out, the year that gave us Justin Herbert and Tua Tagovailoa. I'm going to take that year's draft out, okay? If you take the 15-year period before then, 6 quarterbacks drafted in the first round over 15 years got a second contract with their first team. 20 didn't. So for the concept of, my God, let's just go figure this out with the quarterback position, which is what everybody says. Daniel Jones was supposed to save a franchise. Marcus Mariota at one point was supposed to save a franchise.
You watch your mouth, Fitz.
I Jameis Winston was supposed to save a franchise. Like, you can go up. Justin Fields was supposed to save a franchise, and we still don't know if Justin Fields is any good. Trevor Lawrence was supposed to, the list goes on and on and on. And maybe some of these more recent guys turn out to be good, but there are a lot more Daniel Jones in the first round of the draft than there is anybody. Like, you'd be lucky right now if you're drafting in the first round. You'd be lucky to turn around and find somebody that has the career numbers that Derek Carr has had. So now what do you do? Because if you're the Raiders, you have to look at this year. You have to look at trying to set a culture, and culture means wins. You got to win football games for people to buy in. But you also got to figure out what the future is like when there's a real chance that the outside looking in might say that this roster has holes at the middle of the defensive line, at the linebacker position, at the safety position, at the corner position, on the offensive line, maybe on the second and third wide receivers, maybe at the quarterback. Like, you ain't solving that with one pick in the first round.
Preach to him, Fitz. It's so funny. I mean, funny's probably not the right word, but it's so telling, because I was having a conversation with one of our mutual friends earlier this afternoon, and I said, one of the most bizarre kind of aspects of this whole thing is that if you had asked me in July, August, say, okay, we're going to fast forward to November, and this is the situation you're going to be in, I would say, okay, listen, the Raiders are, I guess the clarity that I was looking for is that we were going to have, to your point, hey, maybe this is a good team, but we need to get better in this one specific area. Throwing that, maybe it's run defense, maybe you need some depth in the cornerback room, whatever it is. But I was thinking, my bet was going to be that there are going to be a handful of areas that you say, hey, going into next year, we feel good, but we need to get better here. And it is a very clear and obvious here. Now, to your point, we sit here in mid-November, and you're not one piece away. You need some help on the offense.
You're not even 3, 4. Think about it, Eddie. Mm-hmm. You've covered the draft long enough. If you hit a home run, if you have the mother of all, oh my God,
you get 2 starters and 4 guys that you think are going to contribute on the back end that first year. That's a home run. Home run.
Two starters, 4 on the back end.
Yep.
That ain't fixing it. That, what we saw right now, that ain't fixing that. That's the beginning of a process of fixing, which is man, and which means Mark Davis has to have a ton of patience. Like, this all gets really complicated. Like, if the answer is let's just fix this with one guy, boy, that's not an answer.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that's the most frustrating thing, right? Is that you and I have gone around and around. There's no easy answers at this point. There's none. There's no such thing as an easy answer for your 2022 Las Vegas Raiders and probably your 23, 24, et cetera. Let's go down the line. But I want to start here as we kind of shift our focus to today, because I have a feeling you and I are going to have a lot of conversations about what the next 6, 12, 18 months looks like for this team in the coming days, weeks, and months, et cetera. My biggest, I don't want to say like my biggest gripe at all, Fitz, but the Raiders fall down 10-0 like that. Like that. You're down 10-0. Now you're chasing on the scoreboard. I don't even know if waving the magic wand is the right term, but how do you come out with a little more pep in your step? We have seen this now. This has been a constant theme for a majority of 2022 for the Raiders. And give them credit for fighting back, eventually taking the lead. Now, they did not keep that lead for very long, all of 50 seconds, if I do my math properly. But, what is the key to coming out with a little more oomph? And because going into this afternoon, with Jeff Saturday at the helm, interim head coach, a rah-rah, big, emotional guy, you had to have known that the Colts were going to come out and you were going to get the best version of the Colts for at least that first 15 minutes. And they did. So I guess I'm trying to make some sense, Fitz. I'm trying to find my piece in how the Raiders can, once again, learn from today, learn from coming out flat and not with the type of energy that you expect, and at least try to find some sort of building block going into the latter part of the year.
I think there's two different sides to this for this particular game. I have no problem, honestly, with the Colts coming out and having a really successful drive early in the game. We had no idea who was going to be calling the plays. You had no idea until very close to the game that Matt Ryan was going to be playing, which is different than what you prepare for a little bit when you're preparing for Ellinger. So you have no idea what the play calling tendencies are going to be like. I think that gave the Colts a little bit of an opportunity to surprise everybody. My problem is the other side of it. You can't have a 3 and out on your first drive offensively. And this comes down to and we talk all the time. The first 15 to 20 plays of a game are scripted, right? What is not working in practice that you're not better able to execute it? And it really makes me think of last week, because last week on the opening drive, there were a couple of plays that didn't go right. And the TV commentator from the outset said, I am really surprised that we didn't see the Raiders come out with a better plan in the first few scripted plays. So that was planted in my head. And I watched today, and I watched the team come out without a real set identity in the first few scripted plays. That's what they practice. That's what walkthroughs for. That's what meetings are for. Those are the moments that you have to come in with better efficiency. I obviously can't see behind the curtain, and I know every professional athlete's working their tail off, but something isn't happening the right way in practice for this team to come out and look so poor in the opening drives of the game, particularly offensively.
I would say I would even kind of dial in on that a little bit more, Fitz, where I would say not only that first drive or those first couple drives, the first play from scrimmage. This is now back-to-back weeks where that very first play from scrimmage, last week it was that incomplete pass to Foster, if I remember correctly, where everyone kind of just looked a little confused. And today it was that long bomb to Mac Hollins on that first play from scrimmage. That wasn't even close. That either Derek was confused or Mac was confused or something got lost in translation from the headset to the play call. Something was lost. But now it's like, I think it sets the tone and it's kind of the perfect microcosm of that confusion, of that, like, you kind of scratch your head a little bit. You're like, look, to your point, Fitz, the first 15, 20 plays, whatever it is scripted. You know what that play call is going to be. You've gone over that in practice. You've gone through that most likely on the Saturday walkthrough. And to have that kind of, like that to me is where I kind of, as a non-football guy, as a guy to your point, Fitz, who is not behind the veil there, who is not behind the carpet, who's not seeing the inner workings of what's going on, you just kind of, as a fan, have to be like, I don't know if I particularly get that one.
The hardest part about that, though, Eddie, is that this is a team that has started fast a few times, right? We've talked about the 3 blown 17-point leads, obviously.
Yep.
Everybody's tired of hearing about that. This is a team that has started fast. When they don't start fast, it just makes me wonder what the week was like, because I'll go back to some of the comments that have been made about players that have or haven't gotten reps. And the comment has been, it's about what you're doing in practice. It's about who you are at practice. And one thing that, if we're going to talk about the Belichick New England tree, one thing New England players talk about is that the quizzes that they have before they even get to the walkthrough on Saturday are brutal. And you're quizzed on what's going to happen if this, then that, to the point that starters can be left off the roster on the next day on Sunday if they don't pass their mental checks, right? I just have to wonder where the disconnect is for this particular team, because when they come out that, I don't want to say checked out, but that incapable of communicating in the first drive, then what's your hope from there? Like, it's just, what did they do? Like, this is one of those moments where I feel like we're back in the movie, what is Office Space, where it's like, okay, if you had to tell me what you do for 20 hours a week, what is it? Like, those are the moments where I'm sitting there like, what y'all, like, somebody map out what you did, because it didn't work. And something in the communication there isn't working in practice.
I also think another kind of, admittedly not football guy Eddie, but like, if I'm looking at the common denominator of things when things are going well, it's feeding Josh Jacobs. It's letting Josh Jacobs do his thing. And he finishes today, decently effective, but, once again, as I pull up the stats here, he goes 21 carries, 76 yards, just under 4 yards a carry. But I looked at our close personal friend Matt Walks during the game, and it was in kind of, I want to say maybe that third drive. It was either the third or the fourth. And I said, look, I know it's not sexy, but at the time I was like, Josh is averaging 4.5 yards a carry. Like, we don't have to overthink this. Give the man the ball. Just let him go to work. And I think, to their credit, to Coach McDaniels and Derek's and everyone's credit, like, Josh did get very involved as the game went on, certainly in that kind of stretch there where he's operating at the backfield. He has the acrobatic catches. But it just feels like sometimes, like, if Josh is cooking, which he has cooked for so much of 2022, let's not reinvent the wheel here. The common denominator of success offensively for the 2022 Raiders is letting Josh go to work. Let the man do what he's getting paid to do.
It just feels like in the last few weeks, there's less trust in the offensive line from the coaching staff. When you look at the play calling and the fact that they are, it feels to me like at times the team is afraid of being in a negative down and distance second down situation, right? Like, so you're hesitant to run it on first and 10 because you don't want to get to 2nd and 8. That's what you're worried about. And then you look at some of the play calling we saw in the passing game early on. You mentioned Devontae was absolutely able to do whatever he wanted, but it felt early on like there was a skittishness from the passing game where it's like, let's just get it 4 or 5 yards here. Let's try and push it to Josh. Let's try and get it out of Derek's hands. I just feel like there's a lack of trust completely on whether or not they feel like this offense can pick up the protection schemes, and whether that's on the line or whether that's on Derek, whether that's on all of them. It feels like the play calling is so safe in some ways or so cute. And it's hard to be both, but it feels like the play calling isn't saying, okay, we need 7 yards. We're going to be able to get 7 yards. It's easy. We got these 15 different plays we can run for Devontae. That's not how this offense runs.
And I think, to be fair, just to kind of, paint a complete picture of the offense, it's been Josh, it's been Devontae, and that's been it. I'm looking at the stats today, Fitz. So Josh leads the Raiders with 78 rushing yards. You know who the second leading rusher was behind him? It was Mac Hollins with 0 yards. After that, it was Zamir White with -1 yards. We shift to the the receiving portion of the stat sheet. Devontae goes off, 9 for 126. The second leading receiver behind him, just in terms of quantity, was Josh Jacobs, 6 catches, 28 yards. If we're going by pure yardage, it's Foster Moreau, 3 for 43. This is what I'm saying, Fitz. The big dogs are not getting a lot of complimentary help. Now, Darren Waller being out, Hunter Renfrow being out, that has a huge impact on things. But all the same, you need your depth guys to kind of step up and to, kind of have their moment in the sun when those moments come.
Yeah, there's a fine line. But Foster, I thought, played a really good game.
Foster, I think, was incredible today. Foster was really good. He had a great day.
I think Foster continues to remind us that for a lot of teams, he would be a starting tight end right now. And, he's a player that is stepping up constantly. That touchdown that he wasn't able to pull down late in the game would have been a tough catch up against his body. Those are difficult plays to make. I thought he played a really good football game. It's strange to me because the one thing that they don't seem to have is like sync, go-to plays, like go-to rhythm of, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. So because they never really have sync, it doesn't feel like the offense has the rhythm to sustain much. And, I think by the end of the year, when we do a case study on this particular Raiders team, It's going to be the lack of sustained drives on offense and the inability to stop teams from sustaining their own drives that will be the story of this game. I told you a few weeks ago, the Raiders offense at times has had limited possessions because the defense doesn't get off the field. What's crazy is now I feel like it's maddening how often the defense is going to be on the field forever. And through the process of the defense being on the field forever, and then the offense having another 3 and out, it's just there's just not enough rhythm for anybody on the offensive side to get comfortable.
I would add to the case study, I would also add lack of clear identity on offense too, right? And I think that there's a fine line between being fluid, between being multiple, between saying, hey, we're going to kind of adjust and change, and then also being like, well, at our core, what is our thesis? Like, to go back to AP Lit, right? What is our thesis of who we are? And I think that unfortunately, as we sit here now more than halfway through the 2022 season, offensively, that thesis is still yet to be written. But Fitz, I'm glad you brought up the defense because we come into today's game, linebacker core, big question mark. Blake Martinez retires. Divine Diablo is on IR. Denzel Perryman, I don't want to say a surprise inactive, but kind of surprise inactive. Luke Masterson ends up getting a ton of run today. But like all the same, it feels like the defense has done enough at times, but it's just been that consistency of, you look at the that example in the second half where the Raiders go down the field, they get the touchdown, and then 4 plays later, Jonathan Taylor goes 66 yards, and momentum completely changes again.
Yeah, and the hardest part with that defensively is that, again, there's no one thing that you say, wow, I wish that this defense could insert here. Like, you mentioned Divine Diablo being out at this point, and I think the Raiders have identified a player that has a real potential in the future for Divine. I think he has the chance to be a part of whatever the Raiders are building here. Masterson, it actually makes a lot of sense to me. Get a young guy in there, get some reps. Let's see how he looks. You knew Jonathan Taylor was going to be a handful in this football game, but you also know that this is a team that just responsibility-wise looks lost. I mean, there's no other way to say something isn't working in the teachings or the execution defensively because you don't get guys running that open in the middle of defenses. And the problem is we've talked about, I think, almost every week now, if your pass rush isn't good, it hurts your secondary. If your secondary isn't good, it also hurts your pass rush. What happens when both sides are failing each other? And that's just a consistent. Guys have so long to get open. I don't know what we expect, especially when the back end of this defense is having communication issues. Quarterbacks have time to find it.
Yeah, we talk about that time for the opposing quarterback. I'm looking through the defensive stats right now, Fitz. The Raiders had a single quarterback hit today that belonged to, no shocker here, Maxx Crosby. But you go down the rest of the list, man, and there is not a single hit to be seen. Max finishes with the 1 sack. The only guy to finish in double-digit tackles as well. But, man, speaking the truth.
Think about this. Think about this. All right. And I'll go back to this. Harry Douglas told me this a few months ago when we were talking about Tyreek Hill. And he was saying, hey, you know what? The Chiefs could be even better without Tyreek Hill. Now that has turned out to be partially true, depending on who you talk to. I still think Tyreek would have been, a tougher handful for them. But the one thing, Harry, I cornered Harry on, I said, what was the term you guys used when you were looking at film in the NFL and you saw that person that you absolutely had to account for? And he said, dogs. And he said, when we went into Falcons, they would have a sticker up that had a dog logo. And it was who are the dogs you got to worry about on both sides of the ball. Ask yourself this. If you are an offensive coordinator and you were sitting there breaking down the film of the Las Vegas Raiders and you walk into the meeting and you say, guys, defensively, here are the dogs. Who are they? The answer to that is Maxx Crosby.
Now, I would also add Nate Hobbs when healthy.
No, yeah, and I think I might be the president of the Nate Hobbs team.
You're definitely on you're definitely in the cabinet. That's for sure.
I'm on the board of directors.
Yeah, you're on the board of directors, no doubt.
But playing right now.
Yeah, 100%. No, 100%.
Playing right now, you look across the board, and there's some good quality depth players, but you weren't sitting there. You're like the offensive coordinator that just gets the job a couple of days ago isn't losing sleep for a bunch of nights because of this group of players that they have to take on. And then when you factor in on top of that, the scheme that they're running that seems to be confusing some of the guys, man, I don't know. Like that's one of the tough things on both sides. Like you can at least look at it and say, if you're a defensive coordinator, who are the dogs? Well, man, usually the dogs are Hunter Renfrow, Devontae, Darren Waller, Josh Jacobs. You got dogs on that side, right? On the other side, on the defensive side of the ball, there's a massive need for a real look at the roster and saying who can grow into being that player.
And I think just to give our guy a little bit more credit on the way out, though, Fitz, is that I think Maxx has a very unique ability to elevate everyone around him, whether that's physically, spiritually, competitive-wise. Like he just has – there's not a lot of guys that have that unique ability, and Maxx is one of them, right? Maxx is the kind of dude like – hey, shoot, if you throw me and you out on the defensive line, Maxx can at least get like a good couple series out of us. I don't know how effective we're going to be, but I'm going to play with my hair on fire. I promise you that.
I tell you, man, we all know that contract that Maxx Crosby just got. I think he's already outplayed
every single penny. Like, every single penny.
You talk about a guy that if I was a GM of an NFL team tomorrow and it was who am I building my defense around and I could pick anybody in the NFL, Maxx Crosby's on that short list for the exact reason you watch him play. And not only does it make you smile, but it makes you want to run through a wall like that. That dude has every ounce of it factor you could ever ask for. And that's why it's disappointing, because in the process of losing games this year, I think we've wasted a year of a transcendent talent pass rusher.
It is wild to think too. And just a quick Maxx story before we move on. We brought up Thayer Munford to the studio earlier this week, and I was downstairs on the practice field waiting to bring him up because a lot of these guys, especially the new guys, don't know how to get up here, right? And Maxx was kind of just there doing his thing, and he's just Addy, just being loud, vocal, fun, high energy Maxx. And Thayer walks away with me, and he's just kind of like shaking his head. He goes, "Man, that guy." And I said, "You know what's funny, Thayer? First off, Thayer Munford, one of the biggest individuals that I've seen walk through this hallway in a very long time. But I said, you know what's crazy, man?" And I was telling him, I was like, when Maxx got here, he was the exact same dude that he is now, just way skinnier. But I was like, he's the same guy. And I think that's a credit to him. That's a credit to his journey. That's a credit to everything that he's gone through on and off the field. He's the same dude now with all those millions in the bank account, with all those columns that come through on the direct deposit. He is the same guy, just bigger, stronger, and even more of a football badass than he was in Oakland.
And the funny thing about that is that will translate. When this team,
guys feed off of that. He's someone you want to play with, Fitz.
And we've seen it in these games when the Raiders are playing well. There's a different energy because everybody wants to hang out with Maxx, and like they're all chest bumping and they're all jumping up on the sidelines. Like it hits different. Everything about him hits different. So it's you got to find more Maxxes. You got to find more people that are not only Maxx, but also I know we're story time here, but I go back to the Man in the Arena. And if anybody listening ever watched the Man in the Arena show on ESPN Plus, I hosted on ESPN. I hosted an after show. And look, I got no love lost for Tom Brady until he ever, solidly admits that it was a fumble and there's no such thing as a tuck. But that being said, the thing that really blew me away is he was talking about the first Super Bowl for him, right? And he's talking about how he was jumping up and down in the tunnel and he was all excited. And somebody walked up to him, I think it was Brewski, walked up to him and grabbed him by the face mask and looked at him and said, "Hey, I don't need that version of you right now. I need you to be yourself." And he took that. He took that message. And then he talked in another episode about how a couple of years later, Willie McGinnis walked up to him on the sidelines and was like, "You are hurting this football team because of the way you eat and the way you drink. You are not taking care of yourself. That will hurt us." And he was like, I received that. I will be better at that. One of the things that I think made Tom Brady who he was for a long time is that he received the input he got from the veterans on that team that were truly responsible for creating the culture of the Patriots. I look at Maxx Crosby as the type of person that can impart that wisdom to anybody. This locker room needs to be filled with players that are willing to receive that energy and let that build them up as well. It's not everybody can do that.
And I think we're going to learn a lot over the next, 8-9 weeks, something like that, until this thing wraps up. You're going to learn a lot about the guys in that locker room. You are going to learn a lot about these dudes because, look, it's easy to be a rah-rah. It's easier to pump your chest. It's easy to say, like, I'm the biggest, baddest dog in this yard when you're 7-2. Not so much when you're 2-7. And so I think what's going to be really interesting, and we are going to learn a ton, it's going to be an educational process for all of us, is you're going to learn the other Maxx Crosbys you have in that locker room. Because I feel very confident here saying on our postgame show on November 13th that we are not going to see any letdown in effort, in enthusiasm, in go get him from Maxx Crosby. We're not. 0% chance of that. And I think it'll be interesting to see the guys that follow that lead, that ride with Maxx, that ride with the Derricks, that ride with some of these leaders on this team and say, you know what? The season hasn't gone the way that we wanted it to go. We still got a lot of football to play, and we're going to play for pride. We're going to play for each other. We're going to put our best foot forward, and we're going to see what happens in 8 weeks. You're going to see the guys that care. You are going to find the guys in this room that are committed to being here, that want to be here, and that understand, like, hey, this isn't going the way we want it to go right now, but the only way it's going to change is if it comes down to us.
Yeah, and there's going to be so much right now. Every single week is a tryout. Every single week's an audition. Because if you're Dave Ziegler, if you're Josh McDaniels, you are looking around figuring out who you want and how you want to build moving forward. This isn't where any of us, myself included, like, look, y'all, I first to admit I was wrong about this team. I thought they'd make the playoffs. Every single time they lose, my phone blows up from ESPN saying, hey, come on this show, talk about where this thing has gone wrong. And it sucks. Like, there is nothing pleasant about sitting here talking about how this thing's gone wrong. But the one thing I know darn well is that as much as we all care, most of the guys in that locker room care 10 times more, right? It's their life, it's their livelihood, it's their sacrifice, it's everything they've ever given to play. The guys that want to be here are going to separate themselves, and Ziegler and McDaniels need to have their eye on it right now, because if you are going to build a culture, I know everybody wants to tank. I know that's going to be the immediate response is let's tank and get, let's go out there and get a player with the second overall pick. I just want to remind you that tanking never creates a culture. And at some point, man, you've got to get how many teams tank and then the same coach and GM see it through all the way to greatness. It is not common. And it's the last, we've been down this road before. Mm-hmm. So guys, we want guys to step up. We want to watch football games where people play like they care. And frankly, I'd rather bank on my GM being able to bank and hit somebody in the draft at 12 overall than sit here and watch a team fall apart all over itself, because there is no easy fix to that.
1,000%. Last one on our way out, Fitz. Raiders had a chance actually to win the game, as crazy as that sounds, because of everything that we've talked about, the tone that we've taken. But real quick, PI on that pass to Devontae on fourth down, your thoughts? I didn't think it was, but I could understand it as a fan of this team why you'd want that flag thrown, but I didn't see much there.
I think the second angle they showed on TV, they could have called offensive PI. Like, his arm fully extended, which you can't do. And there was a lot of hand checking on that. And remember, we always say, well, he's not back looking at the ball. That is a part of pass interference, but they teach you in the officiating seminars you go through, that's only a part of it. So if you're making a play on the ball and you don't interfere, but your head doesn't turn around, it is not pass interference. I thought it was two guys battling for the football. I thought it was a good no call.
I agree, 100%. Last play of the game, two dudes going at it, everything on the line. Let the guys play. I know it didn't go our way this afternoon, but let them play. Well, Fitz. Next up, the Raiders head to Denver, head to take on Russell Wilson and the Denver Broncos, and it's here we are again. And you just hope that the guys in that locker room can kind of pull this thing together, have some competitive, and I think that's another kind of difficult part of all this is outside of the Saints game, these are all such close games. They're all such close games. We heard it from Coach McDaniels after the game too. He said, "Look, it's at some point it's a lot of one possession games, but you got to have them start going your way." And hopefully that's the case for the Silver and Black a week from today. But Fitz, we thank you for hanging out with us, and we thank all of you guys for listening. I know that this is not the most fun, uplifting version of the podcast that we've done, but this is where we are. We appreciate you guys riding with us. So, Freddie Paskal, my guy Jason Fitz, Big Al on the ones and twos, everyone else at Silver and Black Productions, thank you for hanging out with us. And we'll see you guys next week after the Raiders take on the Denver Broncos in the fifth quarter, presented by Twitch.